Before you knew the name on the hood, you knew the color. Green meant one thing, red meant another. Gray meant something else entirely. For most of the 20th century, the color of a tractor was not an aesthetic choice. It was a declaration. It told your neighbors which dealer you drove to when something broke. It told them whose salesman your father had trusted. It told them, sometimes, which side of an unspoken line you stood on. Tractor color was community identity painted in enamel. And the story of how those colors came to mean what they meant is, quietly, a story about how rural America organized itself. In the earliest years of the tractor industry, color was barely considered. The machines were tools, utilitarian iron objects built to replace horses, not to be admired. Early tractors were often left in raw metal gray or painted with whatever primer protected against rust. It was John Deere that first understood what color could do. The company had used green on its equipment since the horse-drawn implement era of the 1800s. Green was already associated with the land, with growth, with the outdoors. When John Deere transitioned to tractors in the 1920s, it carried that green forward and added a yellow that popped against the grass of any field. The combination was deliberate. From a distance, in poor light, at the edge of a 40-acre plot, you could see a John Deere International Harvester move toward red for similar reasons of visibility and brand continuity. Though the specific shade evolved over decades, the Farm-O-Line, which transformed row crop farming in the 1920s and 30s, became synonymous with a particular bright red that made tractors instantly recognizable across the Corn Belt. Ford's gray was different in character. Henry Ford's tractors, and later the Ferguson-built Ford 8N, wore a gray that felt almost deliberately unshowy. Where Deere and IH were proclaiming themselves, Ford's gray was practical, modest, workmanlike. It fit a brand that was trying to reach the farmer who didn't want to spend more than necessary. Minneapolis-Moline went another direction entirely. Their Prairie Gold, a warm, saturated yellow-orange, was chosen to stand out in a market already crowded with green and red. It worked. Anyone who grew up on the northern plains in the 1940s and 50s knew exactly what Prairie Gold meant. To understand why tractor color became a source of loyalty, you have to understand how tractor dealerships worked. In most of rural America through the mid-20th century, there was one John Deere dealer in town, one IH dealer, maybe a Ford dealer. They were not interchangeable. Each carried only their own brand's parts. Each trained their mechanics on their own brand's engines. When your tractor broke down at planting time, when every hour mattered, the only person who could fix it quickly was the dealer whose color was on your hood. This created a dependence that went beyond preference. Buying a John Deere tractor meant committing to the John Deere dealer's parts inventory, his mechanics, his service schedule. It meant building a relationship. Over time, that relationship became trust. And trust, in farming, passes down through families. A father who bought his first green tractor in 1938 was very likely to buy a green tractor in 1952. And again in 1965. His son would buy green. His son's son might buy green. Not necessarily because green was objectively superior in any given year, but because the entire support infrastructure of his farming operation, the parts on the shelf at the dealer 20 miles away, the mechanic who knew his engine, the line of credit he built over decades, was green. The dealerships reinforced this. They hosted field days where farmers could see new models demonstrated. They extended seasonal credit. Buying now, settling up after harvest. They became, in many small towns, as central to community life as the grain elevator or the hardware store. To change brands was not simply to buy a different machine. It was, in some communities, to quietly switch allegiances. To say that the neighbor you'd relied on for 30 years wasn't good enough anymore. If you could have mapped American tractor loyalty in 1955, you would have seen something like a quilt stitched together from county level. Loyalties that bore little relation to state lines. International Harvester dominated the Corn Belt, the arc of intensive corn and soybean production running through Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. The Farm-O had been the machine that made row crop farming viable in this region, and the loyalty that built in the 1930s persisted for decades. Parts of the Midwest were, simply, red country. John Deere held especially strong in certain parts of the Midwest and Great Plains, particularly in areas where Deere Stu Seinlander tractors, the row crop machines farmers called Johnny Poppers, for the distinctive sound of their engines, had become the machine farmers knew how to fix themselves. The simplicity of the two-cylinder design was a loyalty builder of its own kind. Ford's gray machines found particular favor in the East, in smaller mixed farming operations. And among farmers who had bought into the revolutionary Ferguson system, the three-point hitch that Harry Ferguson had developed and Ford had licensed. The Gray 8N became, in the late 1940s, one of the best-selling tractors in American history, precisely because it was affordable, reliable, and served farms that couldn't justify a larger investment. Minneapolis-Moline's Prairie Gold was concentrated in the northern plains, Minnesota, the Dakotas, parts of Canada, where the company's wheat country origins gave it deep roots. In those regions, gold was as much a community color as green or red were elsewhere. These weren't absolute boundaries. In any given county, you might find all four colors working neighboring fields. But the concentrations were real, and they shaped how dealers competed, how communities organized, and how farmers thought about each other. There is a joke, still told in farming communities, that goes something like this: a John Deere man and a Case man will argue all night about tractors and never change each other's mind. A Ford man will watch them and feel quietly superior, and a Minneapolis-Moline man will sit in the corner wondering why nobody's talking about him. The joke survives because it contains something true. Tractor color, in rural communities, was a mild but persistent form of identity politics. It came out at county fairs, at the tractor pull, at the grain elevator when men were waiting in line and had nothing better to do than compare machines. It was rarely hostile. Farming communities had more important things to disagree about. But it was real. It told people something about your farming philosophy. Red IH farmers were often associated with heavier, more powerful machines suited to intensive row crop production. Green John Deere farmers were sometimes seen as traditionalists who valued reliability and resale value. Gray Ford farmers were practical, cost-conscious, often smaller operations. These were generalizations, frequently wrong, but they circulated freely in the way that all community shorthand does. What the color really told your neighbors underneath all the brand debate was simpler. It told them where you came from, whose equipment your grandfather had run, which dealer your father had shaken hands with when times were hard and the parts needed to come on credit. Tractor color was, in that sense, a form of inheritance. Today, the tractor market has changed. John Deere and Case IH, the successor to International Harvester, dominate in a way that no single brand did in the post-war era. Dealer networks have consolidated. The small-town dealership with one mechanic who knew every farmer in the county has, in many places, given way to larger regional operations. But the color loyalty hasn't entirely disappeared. Green hats and red hats still sit on opposite sides of informal conversations. Brand preference is still, sometimes, inherited. And at every tractor show in every corner of rural America, the colors still carry weight, not just as paint, but as memory. The old machines are cared for with a devotion that goes beyond mechanical interests. A restored Oliver, a polished 8N, a running Minneapolis-Moline Z. These are not just tractors. They are the preserved evidence of a specific way of life, a specific community, a specific set of relationships between people and the land they work together. The color on the hood was never just a color. Red, green, gray. 3 colors, 3 communities, 3 ways of saying, this is who we are, this is where we come from, this is how we farm. Subscribe to Old Iron Tractor History, and we'll keep following the stories the colors left behind.